So, welcome everyone. Afternoon, morning, depending on where you're tuning in from, the loveliness of virtual spaces. My name is Andraéa LaVant, and before we begin, I'd like to provide an image description of myself for access purposes. So, I am in my living room office area with some pictures behind me, and this is a shelving unit. I am wearing a floral dress with kind of warm tones, and I have on green, like a deep green pair of glasses today. And my hair is kinky curly-ish, and I am proud Black woman in Phoenix, Arizona. So yes, we're excited to be here today. I myself am a long time, not as long as so many others, disability rights and justice activist, and am the president and founder of LaVant Consulting Incorporated, which is a strategy and communications firm dedicated to supporting and helping people speak disability with confidence. My current and most notable project to date is the privilege of serving as the impact producer for Netflix's Crip Camp, which is executive produced by President Barack and Mrs. Michelle Obama. And my role is really to support leveraging the messaging of the film to affect social change. Today, I am joined by people that I all consider friends, which is really exciting. And we're here not only to discuss the powerful film and its takeaways, but to talk about how modern social justice movements can cultivate their communities to strengthen them for lasting change. We witnessed this in Crip Camp, which begins its story in the 70s, and we are seeing it today. And so we're really excited about chatting about that. So I am gonna stop talking and have our panelists give intros of themselves along with some image descriptions. So let's begin with Natasha Ofili.
Well, hello everyone, and good morning and good afternoon to some of you. So image description, I am a Black woman with some kinky curly hair pulled over to one side, draping down my shoulder, and I am wearing some cool disco inspired earrings. They are orange and teal in color. My background, there's some bright windows with some beautiful sunshine coming in. I also have a gold star sitting on the table to my right, and an hourglass, and then a card that was given to me by my husband. Again, like I said, I am a Black woman. I am a Black deaf woman, to be clear. I am a writer, an actor, and I was recently on The Politician and an Amazon series on Amazon Prime as well. And I am here to advocate for my community, for our Black, deaf, and brown people, for children. And I am so glad to be here to share my story with all of you today, as well as some of my thoughts on social justice and Black Lives Matter. So thank you for having me.
Yay, so glad that you're with us, Natasha. Patrick.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm on the East Coast, so it's actually afternoon for me. My name is Patrick Cokley. Image description, I am also a proud Black man, though I guess if we're going to use complexion, I don't want to get into colorism, but I'm more tea-colored, I guess, than everyone else. Though I think I'm wearing my locks down today, so they're draped across my shoulders. I am wearing cool tones, a very crisp gray blazer, and a Star Trek Discovery shirt, which notes how nerdy I am, but it also says disco, which is fun because that's our hashtag for the disability community. I guess I'm probably best known as a disability advocate and blogger. I've had the pleasure to work on disability-related policies in the corporate, federal, as well as the nonprofit sectors. And I am the administrator of the Lead On Update, which is a sort of social media present organization that does news and talks about the importance of sharing resources to develop positive and effective disability leaders.
Thanks, Patrick. Earlier, one of the panelists described their complexion as Nilla wafer, and I was
I always toy with those. I like tea. I like the tea complexions because
I feel it. Yeah, it was fun. So, Jim.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jim LeBrecht. I am co-director, co-producer of Crip Camp with Nicole Newnham. I am a 64-year-old white guy with glasses and long hair. I have a T-shirt on that says "Independence, Equality, and Freedom," and I got it a number of years ago for a celebration of Ed Roberts Day. And I'm sitting in my home office with some music posters in the background.
Awesome. And Nicole, thank you.
Hi, I'm Nicole Newnham, and I'm the co-director of Crip Camp with Jim. And I've been a documentary film director and producer for 25 years. And also a colleague, longtime colleague of Jim LeBrecht's. He was the sound mixer and sound designer for hundreds of award-winning documentaries and 3 of my previous films, which is how I came to know the story of Camp Jeanette and how I came to work with Jim on Crip Camp. And I am sitting in a corner of my bedroom against a gray wall with a painting of a tree in British Columbia above my head, and I'm a 50-year-old white woman with brownish hair down to my shoulders and glasses that I bought inspired by Judy Heumann's glasses in the in what we call the message to parents scene, one of my favorite scenes in Crip Camp.
Yes, we are all inspired by Judy's glasses. So, all right, let's get into this conversation. So, this first question is for everyone, and I'm gonna just again for access, kind of name, call on you individually. But so, tell us, disabled people and our allies, we know may have different takeaways from Crip Camp, the film. What is the primary message that you took away? And what do you hope others will take away from viewing the film? And so I'd like to start with Jim, and then Jim, Nicole, Patrick, and Natasha. That's the order that we'll go with.
Thanks, Andraéa. I think that one of the prime takeaways that Nicole and I talked about really wanting for our film was that we could change the view around, or the perception of disability, both outside and within the disabled community. That we do something here that causes people to find pride in their disability, to find community in their disability, and to have folks that are not part of our community see us in a light that is realistic, true, and joyous.
Thanks, Nicole.
I totally agree with Jim. And I think, the other message that we really saw when we looked at the footage of Camp Jeanette and when we connected that, we spent time trying to connect that part of the story to the movement that came later. The other thing that I think we thought was the most powerful message was that kind of universal power of community as a springboard for social change. And to me, it's summed up really well in the film by Corbett O'Toole, who says, "We were giving each other, I see you and I believe you." And so it's that thing that can happen in community where you are working across difference to trust people when they say what their truth is, and to listen to people and give them a chance to speak. And the power of that really against kind of common oppression to create change was something that we really wanted to elevate in the telling of the story.
Patrick? Oh, Natasha, go ahead. Yeah.
So Crip Camp was so inspiring for me. I had never seen such an amazing documentary that captured the history of people with disabilities. I never even knew the history existed as a young woman, the history of my own community and other disabled communities, and how, I don't know, it was amazing. It was for me, it was like one of those moments where it's like I'm watching going, yes, finally, oh my gosh, finally, the struggles, the pain, there's words for me to be able to explain and describe. Like the whole time I'm watching this, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is what I've been trying to say my whole entire life. And it just gave me that desire and that passion even further to fight for disabled communities, to look at the system of education and how broken it is, to look at policies. I don't know, it was just that moment of like chills for me, and wanting to learn more about disability rights, because we still have a lot of work to do. And to be honest with you, I mean, we just need to spotlight more people with disabilities, and especially disabled people of color. And so I want to thank Jim and Nicole, honestly, for bringing this to the attention of the public. It was such a beautifully made documentary, and just watching how people have continued to fight for us. And because of the two of you bringing this to light, I actually have learned more about my rights as a disabled person. So I just want to end by saying just wow, honestly, just wow.
Patrick.
Sure. I think one of the powers of the film, though, too, also exists in not just the depiction of the movement, but also as it represents sort of a mainstay. For a lot of social movements in our country, if you're not a part of them, you only get to see them from the outside in. And whereas disability has had, almost, if you go from the full sort of institutional period, all the way up to the 60s and 70s, that's a long amount of time where the whole narrative of disability was always about other people, not about individuals with disabilities. So Crip Camp is sort of a mainstay in that it really plants the flag in a way that if you had not been working in our communities, if you'd not been in a part of this sort of civil rights and justice movement, you really get to see what's going on, and you get to see it told from the perspective of individuals with disabilities. That's awesome. And then by using the Crip Camp narrative, which if you're my age reminds you of stories of movies like Meatballs, or any of those movies where the underdog camp is, trying to show that the preppy camp from across the lake, that they have more heart and they're really out there for more fun. It really ties us to a narrative that people will understand. And if you're an HBCU grad, or if you're an environmentalist who's worked, doing grassroots engagement or marketing or door-to-door work, you see yourself in the faces of these advocates. I mean, there's something really important about that, both at a film space as well as at a movement space. And I think that anyone who sees themselves as a marginalized person will see themselves in our communities, which is way different from the charity models that we'd seen before. So it's super exciting. And Jim and Jen, I'm so glad you guys were able to bring it out to us. If anything, for seeing, advocates like Judy Heumann use the F word in the first 30 seconds of them being on camera. Well done.
Once again, I am Andraéa LaVant, and I'm the impact producer for Crip Camp. And I have with me Jim LeBrecht, Nicole Newnham, Patrick Cokley, and Natasha Ofili. For those that may be wondering what happened, again, we are all about ensuring that everyone in a space can fully access and participate to the best of our ability. We're not perfect, but we wanted to make sure that this is an experience that everyone could fully engage in. And so we're excited to keep this conversation going around Crip Camp, movement building, as community build. Is that the way that it is? Yeah, community building as movement building. Sorry. So let's kind of jump back into our conversation. We got to hear a little bit about what you all hope that others would take away from the film. And so now, Jim and Nicole, I have a question for you. This may be the first time that some people are experiencing what we know as an impact campaign that's associated with the documentary film. And so I would love, and we would love to hear what your original vision was for the campaign and the intention behind that, because not every documentary film actually has an impact campaign tied to it. And Jim and Nicole.
I went first, so why don't you go ahead, Nicole, if you don't mind.
Okay. We always knew we wanted to have an impact campaign associated with the film, because we really were committed from the beginning to trying to make the film a film that would have impact. Like we were talking about before this break, we really saw this as an opportunity to shift the way people perceive disability, to introduce audiences to the disability community in a way, or at least the sort of disability community, particular disability community in the 1970s. And we also saw it as a means of lifting up a civil rights story that too many people didn't know about, or if they did know it, they didn't understand it from the activists and the people with disabilities perspective. And so we really saw that was going to be able to do a lot of good, and especially heading into an election year and all of that. But we convened a brain trust early on in the process with a lot of activists from very different places all over the country and working in different fields from within the disability community, and sort of said, what do you think is the most kind of pressing policy issue that we could sort of use the film to advance? And what was interesting is what we heard back pretty much from everybody is, don't tie this to one policy issue. This is really an opportunity to bring more people into, to identify with a disability, to also to bring the conversation around disability as a social justice issue into places and spaces where it hasn't been before. And people were really encouraging us to take a more kind of broad-based view of it. And over time, we realized that there was so much power in the disability justice movement and in the leaders of the disability justice movement. And we felt like that kind of really iconoclastic, really powerful spirit that we were trying to represent in the film was really alive and powerful in the disability justice movement of today. And we didn't want the film to stay locked in the past. We wanted it to be something that would kind of bring people into to that movement of today. And so we looked to see if we could have people from that movement running our impact campaign, and eventually realized that then therefore they would need to completely design the campaign and sort of take our general broad premise and be the ones to say what we should focus on and what we should do. And that's how we found our way to Andraéa and Stacey Park Milburn, who are brilliant and incredible and envisioned something that is far beyond what we had the capacity to imagine, even when we started out.
I just really don't think I have much to add beyond what Nicole said. It's been an incredible experience, and by really handing it off to Andraéa and Stacey, like Nicole said, it's something well beyond what I could have imagined doing, and has been wildly impactful. I mean, the community that's built up around our film, and one of the major parts of our impact campaign, has been a series of Sunday afternoon virtual Crip camps. And we have a couple more left. One is tomorrow. But that has just launched all of these other communities, people on Facebook who want to continue the conversation, and completely independent of us. But as Nicole and I were making the film, the one word that seemed to be there all the time was community. And it's incredible to see how that is manifesting itself.
That's great. And that's, you hit actually what the next question was. So I'm going to move on and bring Patrick and Natasha in. And, you know, it's time to kind of to dive into what we would say the tea or the truth, right? In this case. And so I would love Patrick and Natasha, you know, thinking about the larger social justice movement. Let's talk about some of the conversations that are missing, and what about even within the disability rights movement. I'd love, you know, Patrick, for you to call out what you've seen consistently as relates to intersectionality and thinking about the intersections of Blackness and disability. And so Patrick, if you want to go first, and then Natasha, would love to hear your perspective.
Sure. Okay. You know, I'm glad that Jim, and to a certain extent Nicole too, that you guys mentioned the Crip Camp, the Crip Camp weekly sessions, because that's a very elegant solution to one of the issues that might be raised if you watch Crip Camp or if you've participated in any social justice movement. I'll give you guys a little bit of an example from my own life that works too. I'm 40, so I am young enough where there's a huge amount of the Black community that talked about, you know, all of the work in the 60s, all of the engagements, the March on Washington's, you know, the everything sort of pre-MLK. And when I went to Howard, I'm a Howard University grad, which is a HBCU, it often felt like you'd missed your opportunity to change the world. A lot of our professors were older. They participated in the movement. And if you weren't, you know, if you weren't compatriots with, you know, your John Lewis's, your Stokely Carmichael's, you know, if you hadn't had the chance to join SNCC, sometimes it felt as if you didn't have a space in the movement, really. Like you could contribute and do things, but you would never do as much as what was done for you. All of that up until really the election of President Barack Obama. That changed a lot of that tone and sort of reconnected a youth and an elder movement in a way that hadn't been done before. What's interesting about Crip Camp especially is that in the disability community, the same sort of thing can almost happen. You could very much feel that if you missed the opportunity to be at Camp Jened, or if you missed the 504 sit-ins, then somehow you were never really going to break into that group. And tying the development of SIL number 1 and the 504 protests and ultimately the signing of the ADA can often make it feel like if you didn't break into that original camp group, then somehow you were missing a part of the movement. You were never really being able to get in. And then if you check an additional box of being a person of color or being queer or LGBTQ, then somehow it even seems more difficult to break in because you'll never be in that space. I loved how in the film it talked about how if you hung out with one of the campers, ultimately you met a lot or all of them. And that sort of coalition is important and awesome, but it can also be daunting if you are attempting to bring in a separate perspective. So what we've seen is a desire to follow in with what Judy says right at the beginning of the film, which is to create a space for everyone to feel heard, for there to be an opportunity to have their voices centered. And yet, if you are new to the movement, that can seem daunting and almost impossible. And so what we've seen discussions from communities of color. We've seen people who've wanted to talk about disability and their racial identity, or disability and poverty, or disability and LGBTQ sort of identity, and finding that they have a problem bringing those issues to bear. Now, this isn't just the disability community. This is an issue that we've seen across multiple communities in any sort of social justice spaces. However, as members of the DISCO, we do have a responsibility to find a better way to address them. We also can fall prey to this idea that there's not enough pie for everyone, or that if we discuss issues tied to disability and something else, that we water down our issues. And then also, as we get older, we're also less likely to be flexible. That's just a thing about getting older. So we really have a responsibility to make sure that we are remembering what it was like to be those campers, what it was like to be young, to have almost anything be possible. And remember that we can talk about these issues all at once, and we will not lose the opportunity for freedom. And that's part of a conversation then that makes disability part of the George Floyd protests, makes disability part of rights for Breonna Taylor, makes disability part of the Women's March, or makes disability part of, protections for LGBTQ people around the world.
Wow. Thank you, Patrick, for all of that. Thank you so much. So this is a tough discussion to talk about because social justice is still very new, especially pertaining to the deaf and hard of hearing community. And full disclosure, as a deaf person in the community, we don't talk about race at all in the deaf community. No one wants to talk about it. It's not comfortable to talk about. It's not a normal thing to even consider within the deaf community, especially talking about George Floyd. With the things that are happening in the world right now, the deaf and hard of hearing community is starting to become divided, and we're facing issues within our own community right now because of what's being brought to light in the world, that Black and brown deaf people are being oppressed within our own deaf community, and talking about how can we start having these conversations? How do we even bring up the subject? And how can we move forward and feel safe about such an ugly truth that has been perpetuated for so long within the deaf community? So, and I'm honestly still trying to figure out myself how to do that. Because for me, I'm a creative person, and I just did a short film recently, which I'm going to mention later, in the deaf community to provide a platform to start talking about deaf people of color. Until we continue to push that issue, the change is not going to happen. And I'm aware it's not going to happen overnight. We've said that forever. It's going to take a lot of years for people to be willing to allow others to be heard. And we want to be heard. So it's really difficult. Our education system in the deaf community is atrocious, especially with Black and brown deaf children. Job opportunities for Black and brown deaf people are less now than they've ever been. There are so many factors that have come up, and the lid has kind of been blown off this whole thing after the George Floyd situation. So this is like a baby step for us. And talking about social justice and the different organizations involved within the community, trying to host workshops and try to figure out what we can do together as a group. But it is still, like I said, very, very new. This is a good stepping stone for everyone in the deaf and hard of hearing community to honestly see Crip Camp and see the branches therein, right? So it's not just the tree, it's all of the branches from that tree that have helped people to be engaged in different communities, outside of the community, inside the community of people with disabilities, to create that dialogue that has been so necessary for so long. Black disabled people, Black deaf people, there's just always been this thing where everybody has felt like they're in survival mode. The second they leave their home, the second I leave my house, I go into survival mode. And it's nerve-wracking, especially now. And my husband, who is actually a white deaf man, when we're seen together on the street, I feel like I'm a little bit safer. And I shouldn't have to think like that, like, oh, I'm okay today because I'm going out with my husband. It shouldn't have to be that way. And there's so many factors that play into this. And again, this is still such a new thing in the deaf community. How to continue to keep this conversation moving is kind of where we are right now.
Oh man, that was great. Thank you. You definitely have. I know I'm thinking and processing. So thank you so much. Patrick, I'm gonna flip it back to you. Um, so in her book, Reclaiming Our Space, How Black Feminists Are Changing the World from the Tweets to the Streets. Say that fast a million times. Social worker, activist, and cultural commentator Feminista Jones explores the transformations we've seen as a result of digital activism. She discusses movement building hashtags like Black Lives Matter, Say Her Name, and today, even this week, we've seen Have Her Back in relation to the new presumptive VP nomination. And so, we know, and especially, Lead on Update and you on Twitter, that disabled people have always resisted. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about some of the ways that disabled communities are reclaiming space, specifically with regard to digital activism.
Oh, of course. I mean, it's actually a very exciting time, I think, for the disability community, in that so much activism and so much speaking out is also digital. I think that we have seen, just because of that, a broadening of our community and even a more robust voice. Not saying that the disability community would not be able to speak in all its diverse power, but we also understand that it's access. Same as the story was told, in the film. If you couldn't get to Berkeley, or if you couldn't make that run from San Diego to the Bay, or if you weren't in those pockets of disability thought that we saw at Hofstra, we saw, on the East Coast at RIT or at Galley, then you probably felt very much separated from a movement, or it meant that your identity was very much tied to a network of blind or deaf or other sort of institutions that had their own sort of defining piece that wasn't about you. Use of the internet, specifically the use of Twitter and social media, I think has given a broader voice and a more impactful voice to disability. We have seen, and in that, we've even seen more engagement across people with multiple identities. We've seen people specifically discussing what it's like to be Black and autistic, or what it's like to be queer and a person with a disability. What I think is most exciting about that too is that in the same way where our lens is sort of pointed at the able-bodied community or sort of mainstream society, it's also allowed us to check ourselves. I think in a way that sometimes can be a bit disconcerting or generationally a little scary for some of our colleagues. I was on a webinar a couple of weeks for the ADA anniversary with one of the sort of stalwart members of our community. I'm not going to say who it is. And they were talking about how they liked the idea of the Crip Camp film and the Crip Camp discussions, but they'd spent so much time, perfecting the language that the disability community wanted to use, specifically getting rid of words like crip and like handicapped. And I remember sort of smiling inwardly to myself and saying, obviously you missed the 90s when all the Black community had serious conversations about the N-word. But ultimately what we had to come to terms with was that young people take and redefine, issues and ideas, and they recycle them into something new. And whereas I understood their disconcerted approach to the use of the word crip, it's like, well, it's power now. So I think that you get to see on social media all of those things happening. You get to see real allies step forth, people who are genuinely attempting to write and to promote disability. And at the same time, you're going to see conversations that are hard conversations, maybe some conversations that used to be internal to our community or inside of certain doors are only known. We see those now very much splashed across the internet in an open forum. And it's part of our growth that we are going to have to come to terms with and very much learn to move forward with.
But that's exciting. We've come a far way from individuals feeling lonely, trapped in their own houses, to being able to open your smartphone and immediately find a disability community to talk to. It's pretty exciting.
It is, and you know, even today, and this experience and what we've seen, you know, in relation to things moving virtual is what we've kind of been saying all along, right? Like it, and so in some ways, and that's not our goal, I think, is to be the example, and yet, because we just, at the end of the day, this is what we've known all along, that we know how to do things right and well. Anybody else want to add to that part of the conversation, Jim?
I just wanted to add on to what you were saying, Andraéa, is that this is a learning process that is constant, that should never stop, and that we've experienced just on the film itself that we could do things better. We could do things better when it came to making sure that we had an open caption version of the film. We learned how in the weekly Crip Camp things that we're doing, that our access wasn't as good as we thought it was, and that the community told us how it could be better. And we may not have been able to fix it in 1 week, but we did it. And so I think that's just an important reminder for everybody. If you're not making mistakes and you're not learning, there's something not quite right here.
Agreed. We're certainly all growing and learning. So Natasha, I'd like to take it back to you. We are all here in recognition of the powerful stories that Crip Camp tells, or even for some that about the lived experiences of disabled people, leading up to the passage of the landmark legislation that called for equality for people with disabilities, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And very recently, in response to the Black Lives Matter protest, you and our friend and colleague, Storm Smith, led a creative project that focuses on the present day experiences of the Black deaf community. Can you share a bit about the project and why you all felt it critical to tell this story now?
Absolutely. So when the George Floyd murder happened, like I said, it kind of blew the roof off of everything. My feelings were, I felt conflicted. I felt like there was a storm brewing inside of me that had been there for a long time that I wasn't acknowledging. It was an overwhelming experience. And then just watching everything happen on television, the traumatic things that were continuing to happen, I just kind of felt tired and angry. And I mean, I was livid. And I was so sad. And there were so many emotions, like I said, brewing inside of me. And Storm has gone through her own trauma as a Black deaf woman, as have I. And so finally, Storm reached out to me and asked me if I could co-write and co-produce a short film. And the reason why we got together to do this is because we felt that it was crucial to show our voice, our Black deaf voice, which, like I said earlier, really hasn't been heard. Black deaf individuals are really kind of the last on the list when it comes to priorities in the deaf community, and we don't have a space to express our anger, our frustration, to be seen. You know, like I say, as dark as we are, the lights are off in the deaf community for the Black community. We're invisible. And so this was sending a really powerful message that it was our turn, and that we do have feelings and that we have a right to feel the way that we feel. So we decided to reach out to our Black deaf community, and every single one of them was instantly on board and felt like, oh my gosh, yes, I would do anything to be a part of this beautiful yet tragic piece. We add the word tragic to that because there is tragedy that creates beauty sometimes, right? So and it went viral. We did not realize the power it was going to possess. And it just gave us such a safe space to really convey that powerful message and start this necessary conversation. And it did. And of course, this is not the end. We have so much more coming. We're actually working on a larger project right now. We're very, very excited about that. It's going to be the next step in this process. I can't say much about it right now. I wish I could, but I am very, very much looking forward to it. It's groundbreaking. It's a groundbreaking movement in the deaf community for now and for future generations. And just trying to do what we can to spotlight Black deaf individuals, their stories, their trauma, how they've made changes, and just give the power back to the community where it belongs. So I'm really excited about what's to come with future projects. And again, sad that we have to do this. Sad that it started with George Floyd, that he was kind of the fire that lit us for this project. But again, beauty comes from tragedy, and it's helping us to create something new in our community.
Oh, I'm so excited. There's a new one coming. I'm super excited about the next phase in the project because indeed, the first one is just amazing. So thank you.
Can we post a link in the chat?
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. And so I'm gonna, Nicole and Jim, bring it back to you to chat a little bit more about the campaign. And specifically, I know, when Stacy and I came on, it was like a week before shutdowns. And so there was certainly this idea and vision, and I think even for us, we had an expectation of what things would look like, and they've shifted. And so I'd love for you to chat a little bit about kind of what it has looked like to shift the campaign in response to the coronavirus and even the Black Lives Matter. And with that, kind of what you see as some of the biggest wins around what's happening.
It's been a topic of conversation for us that, gee, too bad, the whole pandemic happened, and it was like, I think there's been a real silver lining here in that it has enabled Nicole and I to speak to groups throughout the country daily, and certainly we've had days we've been from Kentucky to Maine, back to California. And the beauty of also having it available online is that we don't have to worry about how many wheelchairs we can get into the theater. So, and that there's great accessibility for this project, including a script that can be downloaded from the Netflix website so that people who are deafblind can also experience the film. So it's a little bit off from what you're talking about, but what I want to point out is that this has enabled us to really have some very intimate conversations that would not be possible if we were in a large theater somewhere. So it definitely, lemonade.
We definitely, have found that the film, and especially through the impact campaign that Stacy and Andraéa have designed and implemented, that this film meets this moment that we happen to be in ways that we couldn't have really anticipated. But again, I think it's because of that bridge of that Andraéa is bringing to leading this campaign between the past and the future, and to the communities that we really wanted to try to reach and lift up. And so, when the pandemic first hit, there was even this discussion of kind of like with some of our producers about, well, should we possibly delay it? Because a lot of things had been planned to be in person. And, typically, like a good impact campaign is kind of, partners with organizations and conferences, and you do a series of grassroots screenings, and maybe you do some sort of exciting convenings, and there's precedents around even sort of like doing outdoor screenings in communities, or kind of pairing screenings with movement capacity training and things like that. But Stacy and Andraéa were like, we can do all that online. Like, that's what we're doing anyway, as Patrick was saying. And so, but the way that they were able to envision this series of Crip Camp sessions, led by really incredible leaders and thinkers and teachers within the community, like Patrick, has just been totally extraordinary. Because I think what I didn't really understand was the depth of community kind of connective tissue that already existed online, and how, the film is bringing people into that hadn't been previously a part of it, but it's already there, and it's already really incredible. And there's just this sort of broader sharing out, I think, that can happen to, for some people. So they were like, well, we think we're going to have 1,000 people. That's our goal. To come be part of these sessions, and we want to have them every Sunday for 16 Sundays across the summer. And first off, we were like, well, that is way too much to organize. That's not going to be possible, because we don't have that big of a budget, and it's only a few people. And then we were like, well, do you really think there's going to be 1,000 people who are going to sign up for this thing? And there's been almost 10,000 people who've signed up, and 20% of them are global. They're from all over the world. And the fact that it's running every Sunday is really, I think, providing this kind of like, I think some people feel like going to it every Sunday is kind of like this touch point in the week, almost like going to church or something. And it allows this really, I think it allows people to feel and see how this broad spectrum of issues and different themes and things all kind of interrelate within the community. So it's really been incredible. And then, along with that, they said, we can't really be talking about a documentary film in the midst of a pandemic that's having such a disproportionately negative impact on people in the community, especially people of color. And so, there's been an emergency fund that was created, and they had this, I think of this as a big win. The fund was created in partnership with Color of Change and administered through Color of Change. There's a fellowship. We said Adobe's interested in doing some, promotion around the film. And they immediately saw this incredible opportunity to create a partnership with Adobe that could provide kind of ongoing mentorship and support, where Adobe's kind of expertise and tools could be given to activists and artists with disabilities, and then that could be paired with mentorship from successful artists and activists in the field. And so I think that when we say it really exceeded our expectations, it's like that's enabling response to the Black Lives Matter moment. It's enabling connections to happen that haven't really happened before in some cases, or platforms to be available that haven't been available. And so, it's just amazing. And so much of it, I think, happened because, we were willing to sort of get out of the way, quite honestly. I think it's the other thing I just want to say is that the other way we talked about the design of the work was that we're not creating kind of more work for the Crip Camp film or the Crip Camp team. We were so excited to partner with Andraéa because this is work that is kind of Andrea's work. And so hopefully we're building programs and relationships and work that can be ongoing and can be held from within the disability justice movement, and is not just this sort of like big thing that we've created, in relationship to a documentary film.
Indeed. It's an amazing ride, that's for sure. So Patrick and Natasha, another question for you. Cultivating an intentional disability community means prioritizing collective access. We clearly have learned that today, right? And centering those most marginalized. What can the larger social justice or just larger social justice movement take away from this? Example today.
I'll happily defer to Natasha first if you want to go, and then I'll follow up.
Ooh, story of my life. I will just start there. You know, thinking, I'm not speaking for disabilities communities. I'm speaking as myself, as a deaf Black woman, talking about interpreters, captioning, especially social justice related issues. We are still trying to learn and educate the community with social justice and Black Lives Matter, and we need some kind of access. You know, we've asked different organizations, what is the issue? Why are we not able to provide interpreters and captionists? Why is this such an ongoing problem? And the number one thing for us as a community is, hello, we are the ones who need the support, need the access. So ask us what information. We can give you information that would probably solve all of these problems, check all the boxes. We're the holders of the information, and people just don't ask. And another thing is, y'all have patience, please. People just need to be patient. Nothing that you do for our community is a waste of time. And if you ask us and be patient, and again, if you don't know something and you're coming from a place of ignorance, that is okay. Ask us, get the answer right, and then we can facilitate communication and access to the entire community. It would be, it feels like such an easy problem to solve. And that in turn, educating people when they ask, they are the holders now of information that they can then disseminate to other communities, other organizations. It's literally just about asking the question and taking those moments to make improvements. There's a lot of work to do, which I know I keep saying, but I think that the number one thing is ask the community and be patient. But right now, with social justice and the things that are going on, I'm seeing some interpreters that are going to the protests and doing pro bono work, which is awesome, and trying to get the word out to other interpreters. Captioning on TV and on social media is seriously lacking. We definitely need more of that. But again, most people just don't know. If they don't know what's going on in the deaf community, we often reach out to our hearing friends who are fluent in sign language to find out what's going on social media and in the world. And we get the summary version. We don't get the full extended version of what you all heard or saw. And so captioning everything is the solution. We have a right to every single word, either in sign language through an interpreter or in print. So yeah, just ask and be patient. Those are my two takeaways for y'all today.
Wow. Thanks, Natasha. You know, I think tying in with what, you know, she's saying too, is that we need to have some broader conversations also about allyship inside our community and outside our community. If you are a Black person and you go to Black Lives Matter, or if you go to the movement for Black Lives and you feel that they are not accessible enough to you as a Black person with a disability, or that you're having a problem getting your accommodations sorted out as a part of that movement, you might not feel that you can go back to the disco for support because you've taken yourself and put yourself in this Black space where you're supposed to be able to feel connected and engaged. But suddenly when that doesn't happen, it's like, well, great. You know, can I ask the white people back in the disco to help me advocate to the movement for Black Lives? Is the movement for Black Lives going to listen? And that's a hard question. And I think we see that when we all check multiple boxes. You know, Natasha talked about the unique experience of navigating a Black and deaf community. I think we need to make understanding that sort of navigation in our social movements is a mainstay. That is a normal thing. we've sort of been led ourselves to believe that if we all advocate for disability, if we all advocate for race, if we all advocate for gender, then somehow when we get to those places, we can purely just do those things. But the truth that we know is that that's not the case. We have issues with disability of hierarchy inside of our own community. So I think what we need to do is really sort of think critically and really make some steps to learn how to be an advocate, not just for disability, but then how to take that out into other spaces. And if you're not the one being the takeout, like if you're not the one going to the Latinx community to talk disability, if you're not the one going into the deaf community to talk about race, how then can we offer supports? Because that's where it really gets difficult. And what we're noticing is that a lot of the folks who are talking about intersectionality are talking about the unique way that ableism or prejudice for race and disability can cross over and create their own spaces, is that they find that they don't have supports in either of the two communities that they represent. They either have to educate one while fleeing from the other, or they find that, that they go into one that they're required to keep their mouth shut about one of their identities. So I think that's a space where we could really start having a hard conversation, and also prepare ourselves for when a young person or a person who represents another marginalized group that you're not a part of comes and says, well, I don't think you're being as inclusive as you could be. Making ourselves ready for that, and then making ourselves ready to listen to the ways that we can move forward. And that's a process that takes planning and thought to be able to not knee jerk into, what are you talking about? I'm as inclusive as I could possibly be, to saying, you know what, I'm gonna take a step back. We're gonna go through this process to make sure I'm hearing you, and then we're gonna find our way forward. And again, that's a sin that every social justice movement carries. And I think that the modernity of the disability community, the ways we're learning to communicate more, is making it something more important for us, especially since we cross over with every socioeconomic group, every race, every ethnicity. This is not something that we are going to shy away from or grow out of. So we need to learn how to manage our multiple identities and be positive allies in those spaces. And that way disability will also be seen positively in those spaces.
Yes, all of those.
So if I could add real quick to that, sorry. Amen, first of all, preach. That's what I want to say first. But also I wanted to add that there's kind of a metaphor of building a pyramid. So think about Egyptian pyramids. We all have to be willing and make a choice. Like, we either are going to work together as a team to lay that foundation, or we're going to be divided and we're in our own little groups to the point where it's hard to come up with any kind of solution because everyone is on an island, right? So we all need to just say, let's actually stop for a minute, take all of these individuals or all of these small groups and have everyone together and break down those barriers within each of those communities and separate from those communities as well. And I think that that would set the tone moving forward to lay those blocks. A pyramid can't be built if we're all on an island.
Right. And to further jump in with Natasha too, I think we need to underscore the fact too that this isn't easy work that we're talking about. Like, we're not talking about this because we're like, this isn't a misunderstanding. We have lines inside of our community that we have drawn for whatever reasons. And there have been times where we've decided to step over those lines and to really, collaborate in a way to either bring about the legislation or to address one particular issue. But this isn't an easy thing we're talking about. We're talking about, looking internal and being very deliberate about how we interact with each other. And in that understanding that we're talking about generational lines, like we said, hierarchy of disability. So I don't want anyone to think that I'm insinuating that this is an easy thing. This is something that's going to hurt and cause consternation for all of us continuously. But I can say that it is worthwhile. And once we make it something that we feel is a requirement of everyone who steps into this community with us, we will definitely be better for it. But this isn't easy work. This isn't a sprint, it's a marathon, and it's gonna be a marathon relay at that, where we pass the torch to somebody else.
Oh yes, the knowledge, I love this. Okay, so there's a couple of questions in the Q&A box that I want to get to. We're not going to go much over. So let's see here. It says, when I was watching, first of all, a thank you. And then when I was watching the documentary and watching you folks shutting down streets in New York City and other peaceful protests, I couldn't help but imagine the police of today meeting those peaceful protests with violence. Do you think direct action like that is more difficult to do in today's society without putting oneself at risk, especially those who are more physically vulnerable? If so, how can we keep disrupting without putting vulnerable people in harm's way? Whoever wants to answer.
I mean, I think that's been a big discussion, especially over the last couple of months, about how we can participate safe and not put ourselves in danger, more than most people are already doing, which is really putting their lives on the line. Back then there weren't that many, paddy wagons with wheelchair lifts on them, So, and this, I just look at these pictures from the film of the blocking traffic on Madison Avenue, and it was that one cop looking down, almost looked amused by the whole thing. These are different times now. But like in any situation where disabled people are active and are part of a movement, there's many different roles that any of us take to be very, very powerful. And it is not only finding what you do and what you want to do and what you feel you can do, but that for the love of God, let's not let stigma about disability get in the way of the people we are reaching out to work with, get in the way of our massive potential and power.
And to jump in, Andraéa, with what Jim is saying, this is a conversation that we've had especially with our advocates in the district, who also come down, like with the adapters. And if you've not seen it, I suggest watching the Medicaid protests from when you saw the adapters getting bodily carried out of the Capitol. Changes in access are making it so that, to a certain extent, some of the tools that ADAPT created, especially, with the original Denver bus protests, are starting to change. But there is something to be said that, for instance, not every person of color that wishes to participate in protest can go as far for fear of criminal record or engagement with the system. So it becomes a place where we do need to think critically about how our protest works and finding the roles that can work across multiple communities, and also making sure that we're not saying, if you're not getting arrested, then somehow you're not doing as much as everyone else. And that's a piece that's more about social justice, I think, in some ways, than just about disability, but making sure that we give everyone that opportunity. But yeah, it's a hard question. And yeah, I don't know. When we sent, I know that there was a contingent of young people of color with disabilities that went out for the George Floyd protests. And I called them before they went out and was like, do you have everything you need? Do you have your tools? Do you have my number? Do you need bail? If you take your contingency plans with you and use your network, because that's what it's for. But yeah, that's a real question that I think every person who gets into activism needs to consider.
So true. And I those days, and I'm not in the district anymore. And so then watching and seeing how it all came together, because there were the people on the streets and there were people manning social media or, supporting social media. There were, so many different aspects that go into that. And so that's what it's really been about, again, is what does it look like for each of us, and finding that space, and all of us also embracing that. So incredibly true. So another question that is open to any of you is, how do we move the accessibility of Crip Camp to other communities like Netroots Nation?
Hey, Andraéa, this is Patrick. I don't want to talk too much.
I was literally gonna direct it at you, but I was like, I don't want to, because
I'll jump in on this one because I think we've both seen some positive things happen and some negative things happen.
yeah,
If you guys are watching this, hopefully you're aware that we had to pause this particular workshop because we ran into an issue with our captioning, and we wanted to make sure that the captioning was available. And because we can't have this conversation actively if we don't have captioners and if we don't have our interpreters. That level of engagement and that need for access is something that we have to be unbending on. And whereas this year, I am so excited to see the help that we got from our hosts and from our backends making sure it worked. I had an experience with Netroots last year where it did not work out so well. And I had to raise my voice and use my parent voice at some of the staff who were attempting to remove accessible ramps and attempting to insinuate that that I needed to wrap up my panel full of individuals with disabilities because they had something else they thought was better to do. It's not an easy walk. We have to be unapologetic about the need for accessibility. And when it's not our access, for instance, I'm not deaf, but when there's not an interpreter, I need to go as hard as if they didn't have large print or as if they didn't have audio description for me, so that I can support my deaf colleagues. And we have to get to a place, where you see even in the film, we see this move from, well, first, we just want a place. We just want to be involved. Okay, now we want to be involved. We want to lead. Okay, now we want to lead. We want everyone else to be able to come with us. And we have to remember that we're not at a place where just being there is enough anymore. We have to be engaged and active. And if we're not doing that, then we are not really there. And that's not an easy road. Like I said, I was not expecting to curse somebody out on a workshop panel, in the city of brotherly love. But that happened because it had to happen. And thankfully, it sounds like my words were well listened to this year.
yes, thank you, and I just must say that we're glad that you came back, because that's the whole thing too, right? I think that we have to recognize, and sometimes there's a choice there, right? And where we want to be and how we want to navigate. And so it certainly would have been, if you would have said no, like, that's totally understandable too, right? But also recognizing where there's space for us to continue to advocate for and see the change happening. So, Natasha, are you going to say something? Oh, I just saw you.
No, I just said thank you to Patrick for the big daddy voice, the big parent voice coming out and saying what needed to be said.
Yes. And Nicole, I saw your mic come up, so feel free to add.
I was just going to say that, this whole process of putting Crip Camp out in the world has been full of access issues. And so a lot of times that's looked like, Jim and I kind of trying to use the film as an icebreaker to bring various platforms, film festivals, et cetera, up and to do better around access. But also we've had our own learning. And I just want to say, it's like for me, I've had to really struggle to accept that I'm going to be the one that people are yelling at sometimes because I don't understand everything. And that, if I really care about this, I have to be willing to deal with that and then try to fix it and then move on from there, And we had this very, transformational experience at Sundance where we were playing the film with captioning devices, and the devices didn't sort of fit very well in some of the older theaters at Sundance. And so we had a couple of deaf journalists who came to see our film and cover it, who were not actually able to experience the film at a huge screening. And one of them was supposed to moderate a panel following the screening. And she addressed us and said, why did you think that was acceptable? Why aren't you just playing it with open captions? And we literally sort of were in this place of thinking like, well, we're really glad that there are captioning devices and we think that's great. And she was like, really? That's how you think it's good to watch a film? And, within 2 days, we were able to make sure that the rest of our screenings were played with open captions, and everyone kind of supported that happening. But it took that kind of moment of awakening and somebody, you know, using their parent voice at us for it to happen. So I guess I just want to encourage those who are allies to just be willing to go through those things, and know that you're going to keep going through them, and you know, that's just the process.
It's good and so true. And I think that it's also recognizing that the more voices you have, especially when it comes to disability, we all don't know. I'm a wheelchair user and I know my experience, right? And even being involved in Crip Camp, as far as the impact campaign and our weekly series, we've learned along the way. People that have been with us the whole time have seen things change, even up until last week, as we, you know, recognize and hear more from the community about what it's going to take to ensure that it's the most accessible and not perfect, and yet always striving for collective access for everyone. And that's really what it takes, is ensuring that you're asking, like Natasha said earlier, and listening. So one final question. It just would like to hear from each of you, kind of your parting thoughts on one thing. I always kind of like to do a little mic drop at the end, right? There's a one thing that folks here with us today can and should do to advance movement building overall, and you know, if there's anything specific to disability that you want to emphasize, feel free to do that as well. So we can start with Jim.
Thank you, Andraéa. This is the wonderful experience for me on this film, is having a moment like this where I really get to sit down with Natasha and Patrick and really all of us share our experience. And, you know, that's really so important, that we're just want to listen, are open to listen, and that we enable this kind of communication is essential. And, you know, and I think talking about uncomfortable conversations, you got to have the ability to do that if you really want to have a life in which, this is my personal opinion, but you know, you got to be willing to do that if you really believe what you're saying. So that's been my experience, and I'm very grateful for that experience. I would also just want to say that, you know, the current generation of activists, the disability justice movement, I believe that there's a wonderful kind of parallel between those 20-year-olds that were in the sit-in that we see in Crip Camp, that were sitting in that building, you know, for 26 days. And that they are the current generation that we support, that we have to support, and that will help us, will ensure that we move forward. Because where we are right now is far from being good enough.
Thank you. Nicole?
I mean, I agree. I think that for me, the biggest lesson of the film and the experience making the film and the experience of engaging with all of you around the impact campaign is still that thing of just like basically listening to people and trusting that they know better than you do what their experience is and what their needs are, you know. And also, I mean, I just it's been really interesting to me because I've been involved in very many different kind of social justice spaces and issues and causes throughout kind of a career where I've tackled lots of different subjects through documentary film. And it's so interesting to me that now when I look at the work that different organizations are doing around different kinds of social justice issues, if I see that they're not accessible or that they're not including disability in their movement, it's like, to me, it feels like a huge omission. Whereas before, my experience immersing myself in this story and this community, it did not seem that way to me. And so I guess I just want to call on anybody who's working in any kind of social justice cause to really take a really good look at, if you can truly say you are living up to your principles, if you're not really reaching out and thinking about how you are being inclusive and accessible, and how you're reaching out and connecting with your constituents with disabilities.
Great. Patrick.
Sure. I would say that, the model that many of us have learned in getting into social justice of any type or any movement-based work has always been one that was based on the idea that if you slice your piece of the pie too fine, or if you advocate for too many things at once, then somehow you'll water down our message or your message. And that's been something that every community has fought with. During the '68 March, we didn't talk about Bayard Rustin being Black and being gay because we were worried it was going to, water down the movement. You get to the Women's March of the '70s, and they don't want to talk about the influence of Black women because there's a fear that it'll water down the movement. But we've proven that freedom doesn't work like that. Justice doesn't work like that. There's enough justice pie for everyone, and there's no way to slice it too thin. But the issue is that being brave enough to believe that and to act on that is not easy, because we are in a system that tells us that it's not going to work. Even though we might know, even though we might have seen pure evidence with our hearts, we still are told that if you advocate for one or too many things, then you'll water it down. So my suggestion to everyone is that we discard that idea totally, and remember, it's especially since everyone's been quoting it lately. If one of us is going to get free, we all have to get free, and if we all don't get free, then none of us are free. And to really take that and use it as the thing that motivates you, so that when you see a production like Crip Camp and you look back at those young people who are your elders and you say, I wonder if we would have been friends. I wonder if they would have seen a place for me with them. Then you can know for sure that the answer is yes. And the message of the film and the message that we're really trying to say about inclusion for everyone really can translate and be something that everyone can take away.
Justice pie. Come on now. That's it.
Better get some.
Yes. All right, Natasha, drop the mic.
I'm ready to drop it. So what I would love to tell anyone who's a part of this today, just my personal message, what I say over and over again: you matter, your story matters. So don't be afraid to share your story, your narrative, because when you do, the rest of the world will listen. If you are willing to listen, and I do want to reiterate, listen and ask the right people the questions about their journeys and where they have been, because you will learn so much information about us as individuals, what our struggles are, the oppressions that we have felt, our lived experiences, for you to understand and learn and put a new lens on how you see things and really truly unpack the stories of other people. So just listen to people's stories, and that would be my preach for today.
Oh, yes. I love it. I love it. I love it. You all are amazing. Natalie put all the fire emojis, and I'm with them on that. So thank you all, not only for sharing your wisdom, but this is just all of the things that even happened over this past hour and a half or so. We hope that they demonstrate for all of our allies and our community members just what it means to really be inclusive and engaging. So thank you so much. There's been resources that have been passed along here. I know I am pumped to see Natasha, your project, and to follow what everyone is doing, and we hope that you all will join us on our Crip Camp journey and just all that is to come. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. This has been so great.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Take care.
The links to the video are also in this session if you have not watched Crip Camp yet.
Yes.
It's great.
Newsflash, if you somehow missed it, it's great. And I think I mentioned this to you guys. If you do have some content that you'd like us to include in the session page or in some of the follow-up, you can feel free to send that to me. Jim, I did add, Alice Wong is amazing. I live in San Francisco, so had the occasion to meet her actually a while back.
All of her stuff in the background.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yep. And
Thank you.
Indeed.
This was just...
I also made sure to add the disability visibility project link to the session page too. So the video's there, that link, and if you guys have some other content, because people will be coming back to look at these sessions later, we can include that stuff for you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll email a link to our Lead on Update page on our social media as well, so I'll send that over. Thank you so much.
Take care. Thank you.
Very
No worries. Later on,
welcome.
guys.
Thank you all. This was an amazing discussion.